I came back from a trip and the lock on my own house was changed. My daughter-in-law opened the door and said, "We moved you to a new address. Go to the nursing home." My son nodded. I laughed loudly and said, "All right, dear." The next day, I prepared a surprise that made my phone ring nonstop. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Belinda, and I'm 65 years old. I never imagined that after 3 weeks of caring for my dying sister in another state, I'd come home to find that I no longer had a home at all. The flight back had been exhausting. 23 days sleeping on Linda's uncomfortable couch, watching her fade a little more each day, holding her hand through the worst nights. The doctors said she had maybe 2 months left. Cancer doesn't care about timelines or convenient schedules. I'd promised Linda I'd be back next week, that I wouldn't let her face this alone. But first, I just wanted to sleep in my own bed. I pulled into the driveway at 6:17 in the evening. The house looked the same as always. The white paint I'd touched up last spring, the rose bushes I'd planted 5 years ago now in full bloom. My son Elliot's truck was parked in its usual spot. I felt a small warmth in my chest. Maybe he'd made dinner. Maybe we could sit together and I could tell him about Linda, about how hard it was to watch your baby sister disappear piece by piece. I walked up the front steps, my suitcase bumping behind me. My keys were already in my hand, the same keys I'd had for 15 years, the house key with the little yellow tag I'd added so I could find it easily in my purse. I slid the key into the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again, thinking maybe I was just tired, maybe I wasn't doing it right. The key went in but wouldn't turn at all. I pulled it out, checked it, made sure it was the right one. Yellow tag, definitely the right key. My heart started beating faster. Had something broken? Had the lock frozen somehow? I knocked on the door. Once, twice. I could hear movement inside, footsteps approaching. The door opened, but only about 6 inches. The chain was on. Esme stood there. My daughter-in-law. Elliot's wife of 4 years. She was wearing one of those expensive loungewear sets she loved, the kind that cost more than I used to make in a week when I was working as a nurse. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail. And she was smiling. Not a warm smile. Not a welcoming smile. Something cold and sharp. "Belinda," she said, like she was greeting a stranger at the door. Not her mother-in-law. Not the woman who'd lived in this house for the past 4 years. Just Belinda. "Esme, honey, my key doesn't work. I think something's wrong with the lock." She tilted her head slightly, still smiling that awful smile. "Oh, that. We changed it." I blinked. "Changed it? Why would you change it?" "Well," she said, drawing out the word, "we've made some decisions while you were gone." Behind her, I could see into the living room. The photographs on the wall, the ones of me and Elliot when he was little, the ones from his college graduation, my mother's portrait, they were all gone. The walls were bare except for some new modern art pieces I'd never seen before. "Esme, I don't understand. Can you let me in? I'm exhausted." She laughed. Actually laughed. "That's the thing, Belinda. We've decided this arrangement isn't working anymore. You've been. Well, let's be honest. You've been taking up space we need, so we've made other arrangements for you." My mouth went dry. "Other arrangements?" "Mm-hmm. There's a very nice assisted living facility about 15 minutes from here. Sunny something. Sunny Pines? Sunny Meadows? One of those names. They have vacancies. You should give them a call." I felt like the ground was tilting under my feet. "Esme, what are you talking about? I live here. This is my house. Actually," she interrupted, her voice getting sharper, "this is Elliot's house now, and mine. And frankly, we're starting a family. We need the space. We need the privacy. We don't need a live-in mother-in-law who's always," she waved her hand vaguely, "around. Where's Elliot?" My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. "I need to talk to Elliot. He's right here, actually. Elliot." She called over her shoulder, not taking her eyes off me. "Your mother wants to talk to you." I heard his footsteps before I saw him. My son. My only child. The baby I'd rocked through colicky nights, the toddler I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd worked double shifts to send to college. He appeared behind Esme, and my heart squeezed with hope. "Mom," he said. Not warmly, just acknowledging I was there. "Elliot, honey, what's going on?" Esme says, "Yeah, Mom, we need to talk about this." He couldn't quite meet my eyes. He kept looking at a spot just over my left shoulder. "Things have changed. Esme's right. We're planning to start a family, and we need space. The house isn't big enough for all of us." "But this is my home," I said, and I hated how my voice shook. "I've lived here for—" "You've lived here as a guest, Mom, and we appreciate it, we really do. But it's time for you to find your own place." "My own place?" "Elliot, I sold my house 4 years ago to help you with the down payment on this one. I gave you $48,000. Everything I had from selling my mother's house." Esme made a little sighing sound like I was being tedious. "And we've provided you with free housing for 4 years, Belinda. I'd say we're even. Even. 4 years of my life, of helping with groceries, of cleaning their house, of making dinners they barely touched, of making myself smaller and smaller so I wouldn't be in the way. And we were even. Elliot," I tried one more time, looking directly at my son. "Please, tell me this isn't real. Tell me you're not actually doing this." He finally met my eyes. For just a second, I saw something there. Guilt, maybe, or shame. But then Esme put her hand on his arm, and his face hardened. "Your stuff is in boxes in the garage," he said. "We packed everything up. You can take whatever you need right now, and we'll store the rest for a while." "You packed my things. I couldn't quite process it. While I was taking care of Linda, while my sister is dying. We didn't know when you'd be back," Esme said, shrugging. "And we have painters coming next week. We're turning your room into a nursery. Isn't that exciting?" My room. The room I'd slept in for 4 years. The room where I'd cried myself to sleep after Linda's diagnosis. The room where I'd carefully kept all my belongings contained, not spreading out, not taking up too much space, trying so hard to be the perfect houseguest in what I'd foolishly believed was my home. And they were turning it into a nursery. They'd probably already picked out the paint color. Something strange happened then. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the sheer absurdity of standing on a doorstep, locked out of my own life. But I started laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that sounds a little bit insane, the kind that makes people take a step back. And that's exactly what Esme did, her confident smile faltering for just a moment. "Okay," I said, still laughing. "Okay. You want me to go?" "I'll go." "Mom," Elliot started, but I held up my hand. No. You've made yourselves very clear. Esme wants me gone." I looked at my son. "You're not man enough to stand up to your wife or protect your mother." "I understand now. I understand perfectly." I turned and walked toward the garage, my suitcase forgotten on the front steps. The garage door was open. Inside were boxes. So many boxes. My entire life packed away in cardboard, labeled in Esme's perfect handwriting. Belinda. Clothes. Belinda. Books. Belinda. Kitchen items. The mixer I'd owned for 30 years. The cast iron skillet my mother gave me when I got married. The measuring cups I'd used to bake Elliot's birthday cakes every year of his childhood. All in a box. All disposable. I grabbed one box, just one, and carried it to my car. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I got in my car, set the box on the passenger seat, and started the engine. Through the rearview mirror, I could see them standing in the doorway. Esme had her arm around Elliot's waist, already victorious, already celebrating their reclaimed space. I drove to the end of the street before I had to pull over. That's when the tears finally came. Not quiet tears. Loud, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My son. My baby boy. The child I'd sacrificed everything for. And he'd just thrown me away like garbage. I sat there for 20 minutes, maybe longer, until there were no tears left. Then I wiped my face, took a shaky breath, and pulled back onto the road. I had nowhere to go, but I'd figure it out. I always did. What I didn't know yet was that in that one box I'd grabbed, buried under some sweaters I hadn't worn in years, was a large yellow envelope. An envelope I'd tucked away and half forgotten about, containing documents that would change everything. But that would come later. First, I had to survive the longest night of my life. I ended up at the Starlight Motel on Highway 41. It was the kind of place where you paid by the night and didn't ask too many questions about the other guests. $60 for a room with a saggy bed, a TV that only got 3 channels, and a bathroom that smelled like industrial cleaner trying to mask something worse. But it was a roof, and it was mine for the night. That was more than I'd had 3 hours ago. I sat on the edge of the bed, that single box beside me, and stared at the ugly brown carpet. The pattern was supposed to hide stains. It didn't work very well. My phone buzzed. I looked at it, expecting maybe Elliot had come to his senses. Maybe he'd realized what they'd done. Maybe. It was a text from Esme. Just 2 sentences. We put the rest of your boxes in storage unit 23 at public storage on Maple Street. You have 30 days before we stop paying for it. 30 days. They'd given me 30 days to figure out my entire life. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. Instead, I just turned it off and set it face down on the nightstand. The thing about being alone in a cheap motel room is that there's nothing to distract you from your own thoughts. And my thoughts were brutal. I kept seeing Elliot's face. Not from tonight, from years ago. I saw him at 3 years old, crying because he'd scraped his knee. I'd kissed it better, and he'd stopped crying immediately, trusting that Mommy could fix anything. I saw him at 8, so proud in his Little League uniform. His father had already left us by then, just disappeared one day when Elliot was 5. Said he'd found someone else, someone without the baggage of a kid and a wife who worked too much. I'd worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. Day shift as a nurse at County General, night shifts when I could get them at the clinic. Elliot spent a lot of time with babysitters, with my friend Dorothy, with anyone who could watch him while I tried to keep us from losing our apartment, but I always made his games. Always. I'd leave work exhausted, still in my scrubs sometimes, but I'd be there in those bleachers, cheering louder than any other parent. I saw him at 12, struggling with math homework at our tiny kitchen table. I wasn't good at math. I'd barely graduated high school myself before I got pregnant, but I sat with him every night until he understood it. We'd work through problems until midnight sometimes. He'd fall asleep with his head on the textbook, and I'd carry him to bed. He was getting too big for that even then, but I did it anyway. I saw him at 16 getting his driver's license. He'd been so happy, so excited about the freedom. I'd saved up for 8 months to buy him that beat-up Honda Civic. It was 12 years old and had 160,000 miles on it, but it ran. And he'd hugged me so tight that day, said, "Thanks, Mom, you're the best." And I'd felt like maybe I was doing okay. Maybe despite everything, the poverty, the long hours, the exhaustion, maybe I was being a good mother. I saw him at 18, opening his college acceptance letter. Full scholarship to State University. He'd worked so hard for that, and I was so proud. But the scholarship didn't cover everything, didn't cover books, or housing, or food. So I picked up extra shifts. I sold my mother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing I'd inherited. I cashed out the tiny retirement account I'd been building. Whatever it took to make sure Elliot could focus on school, could have the future I'd never had. 4 years of college. 4 years of me working myself to exhaustion so he wouldn't have to take out loans, so he wouldn't graduate with the crushing debt so many kids had. 4 years of phone calls where he'd tell me about his classes, his friends, his life, and I'd tell him I was fine. Everything was fine. Even when I was eating ramen for dinner 3 nights a week so I could send him grocery money. Then came graduation. He got a good job, really good in software development. Started making more in his first year than I'd made in my best 3 years combined. He rented a nice apartment, bought a new car. Started dating Esme. She came from money, real money. Her family had a summer house, a winter house, and what they called their regular house. She'd gone to private schools her whole life. When Elliot brought her to meet me that first time, I could see her looking around my small apartment, taking in my secondhand furniture, the linoleum with the crack I'd tried to hide with a rug. She was polite enough, said all the right things, but I saw it in her eyes. Judgment, pity maybe, or maybe just disappointment that Elliot came from this. They got engaged 6 months later. Elliot told me they were looking at houses, but everything in their budget was either too small or in a bad neighborhood. He seemed stressed about it, worried. So I offered. Of course I offered. My mother had died the year before, left me her house. It was small, just a 2-bedroom cottage, but it was paid off. I'd been thinking about selling it anyway, maybe using the money to finally retire early, travel a little, but Elliot needed help. The house sold for $56,000. I gave him $48,000 for his down payment. Kept $8,000 for myself, thinking that would be enough to get a small apartment, start over. But then Esme said, "Belinda, why don't you just live with us? At least for a while. It would be silly for you to get an apartment when we have a spare room, and you could help out around the house. It would be perfect." Help out around the house. That's what she'd said. I thought she meant occasionally, casually. What she meant was that I'd become their live-in maid and cook, unpaid, while they saved money and built their life. For the first year, it was okay. Elliot was still Elliot. Still gave me hugs, still asked about my day. But gradually, things changed. Esme would make little comments. "Belinda, could you maybe not leave your shoes by the door? It looks cluttered. Belinda, I've put together a grocery list. Could you pick these things up? Belinda, we're having friends over Friday, so maybe you could eat in your room that night, just to give us some space." I'd learned to make myself small, to stay in my room when they had company, to eat dinner early or late, whatever was more convenient for them, to never complain when they'd go on vacation and not invite me, leaving me to house sit, to smile when Esme bought a new dress that cost more than my monthly contribution to groceries. And Elliot? He'd stopped really seeing me. I became part of the furniture. He'd walk past me in the hall without speaking. We'd go days without having a real conversation. When I tried to engage him, ask about his work or his life, he'd give me one-word answers and then find an excuse to leave. I'd told myself it was just a phase. Young couples needed space. He was building his career, his marriage. He still loved me. He was just busy. But tonight had proved what I'd been afraid to acknowledge. I'd become a burden, an embarrassment, something to be disposed of when I was no longer useful. The tears started again. Quieter this time, just running down my face while I sat motionless on that terrible motel bed. I'd given him everything, every dollar I'd ever saved, every hour of extra work, every sacrifice, every dream deferred. I'd poured my entire life into making sure Elliot had better than I'd had, and he'd thrown me away. The worst part? I'd seen the signs. For the last year, maybe longer, I'd felt the shift, felt myself becoming unwelcome. But I'd ignored it, made excuses, convinced myself I was imagining things. I wasn't imagining anything. They'd just been waiting for the right moment. And apparently, while I was 3 states away watching my sister die, that was their moment. I must have cried myself to sleep eventually, because I woke up with the lights still on, still fully dressed, my face stuck to the cheap pillowcase. My phone said it was 3:47 in the morning. I got up, washed my face in the tiny sink. The woman looking back at me in the mirror looked old, exhausted, defeated. I went back to the bed and finally opened that box I'd grabbed. Might as well see what I was working with. On top were some sweaters I'd knitted years ago. Beneath those, some books. Beneath those, random items. A jewelry box with mostly costume jewelry, a small photo album, some papers. And then, at the very bottom, a large yellow envelope. It was worn, the kind that had been moved around many times but never opened. I pulled it out, confused. I didn't remember packing this. Then I saw what was written on it in my own handwriting from years ago. House documents. Important. My heart started beating faster. I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. It took me a minute to understand what I was looking at, my tired brain struggling to process the legal language. Then I saw it. The deed to the house Elliot and Esme were living in, the house they'd just locked me out of. And there, in black and white, was my name, Belinda Clark, primary owner. I'd bought that house 15 years ago. Bought it with money from my divorce settlement. Not much, just $42,000, but enough for a down payment. I'd lived there alone for 11 years before Elliot even met Esme. 2 years ago, when they got engaged, Elliot had asked if I'd add him to the deed. Just in case something happens to you, Mom, so I won't have to deal with probate. That's what he'd said, so I'd added him. But I'd never removed my own name. I'd never transferred it entirely to him. I was still on the deed. According to this document, I still owned 70% of the house. They couldn't lock me out. They couldn't change the locks. The house was mine. I sat there on that motel bed, holding those papers, as the truth sank in. Elliot and Esme thought they'd won. They thought they'd successfully disposed of me, like I was trash they'd been too polite to throw out until now. They had no idea that the house they were sleeping in, planning their nursery in, celebrating their freedom in, it wasn't theirs to keep. For the first time since I'd turned my key in that lock and found it wouldn't turn, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was something harder. Something that came from a place I didn't know I had. They thought they'd broken me. They thought I'd just slink away quietly, grateful for the 30 days of storage they were so generously providing. They were wrong. I had work to do in the morning. I needed to find a lawyer, a good one. And then I was going to teach my son and his wife a lesson they'd never forget. You don't throw away the woman who gave you everything. Not without consequences. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on the motel bed with those papers spread around me, reading every word 3, 4, 5 times, making sure I understood exactly what I was looking at. The deed was clear. The house at 412 Riverside Avenue had been purchased by me, Belinda Marie Clark, on March 14, 2009. Purchase price, $187,000. I'd put down $42,000 and taken a mortgage for the rest. Paid it off over 13 years, every single month, never late once. When Elliot got engaged 2 years ago, I'd added his name to the deed. The lawyer at the time had explained it would make things easier if something happened to me. Avoid probate, he'd said. But the way it was filed, I retained primary ownership. 70% me, 30% Elliot. They couldn't sell the house without my signature. They couldn't refinance it. They couldn't legally kick me out. That house was mine. At 6 in the morning, I was sitting in a diner 3 blocks from the motel, drinking burnt coffee and eating eggs I couldn't taste. I'd changed clothes, washed my face, tried to make myself look presentable. Professional. At 8:30, I was standing outside the law offices of Margaret Chen and Associates. I'd found her online. She specialized in property law and family disputes. Her website said she offered free consultations. I was banking on that because my bank account had exactly $1,347 in it. Not enough to wage any kind of legal battle, but enough to get started. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, asked me to wait. I sat in the lobby, gripping my yellow envelope, watching the clock tick forward. 8:45, 8:52, 9:03. Mrs. Clark? Ms. Chen will see you now. Margaret Chen was younger than I expected, maybe 45, with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. Her office was neat, organized, the kind of place that made you feel like problems could be solved here. Please, sit down. Tell me what brings you in today. I told her everything. The whole story spilled out. How I'd raised Elliot alone, how I'd sold my mother's house to help with his down payment, how I'd lived with them for 4 years, how I'd come home from caring for my dying sister to find the locks changed, how Esme had told me to go to a nursing home, how my own son had stood there and let it happen. Margaret listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Do you have the deed? I slid the envelope across her desk. She pulled out the papers, examined them carefully. I watched her face, trying to read her expression. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 5 minutes, she looked up. "Mrs. Clark, do you understand what this means?" "I think so, but I want to make sure." She turned the deed so I could see it, pointing to the relevant sections. "You own 70% of this property. Your son owns 30%. Under state law, they cannot change the locks without your permission. They cannot evict you from a property you own. They cannot sell the property without your signature. What they've done isn't just morally wrong, it's illegal." I felt something loosen in my chest. "So I can go back? I can just go back home?" "You can, but I'd recommend a more strategic approach." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "Mrs. Clark, may I call you Belinda?" "Please." "Belinda, from what you've told me, your son and daughter-in-law thought they could push you out because they believed you had nowhere else to go and no recourse. They were counting on you being too scared or too tired to fight back. Is that a fair assessment?" "Yes, that's exactly right. So, if you just show up at the door demanding to be let in, what do you think will happen?" I thought about it. "They'll fight me. They'll make my life hell. Esme will never let it go." "Exactly. They'll make living there unbearable. They might comply with the legal requirement to let you in, but they'll make every single day miserable. And eventually, they'll wear you down until you leave anyway." My heart sank. "So what do I do? Just let them have it? Let them win?" "No." Margaret's smile was sharp. "We make them leave." I stared at her. "Leave? But Elliot owns 30%. He has a legal right to be there." "He does. But you own 70%. And as the majority owner, you have certain rights that supersede his. We can file for partition of the property, essentially force a sale or buyout. But that's complicated and takes time. There's a faster way." She pulled out a fresh legal pad and started writing. "Your son and daughter-in-law changed the locks without your permission. That's illegal. They've essentially locked you out of your own property. We can file an emergency motion to regain access. But more than that," she looked up at me, "we can file for their removal based on hostile possession of your property." "I don't understand. They're occupying a house that's primarily yours. They've locked you out, and they've made it clear they intend to exclude you permanently. That's hostile possession. We can argue that they need to vacate while we sort out the ownership situation. They'd have to move out. Elliot and Esme? Yes. Now, here's what you need to understand, Belinda. This is going to be expensive. Legal fees for something like this could run anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000, maybe more if they contested aggressively. Do you have access to those kinds of funds?" I thought of my bank account. $1,347. "No, I don't." Margaret nodded slowly. "What about the equity in the house? What's it worth now?" "I don't know exactly. Maybe $350,000? Maybe more. The neighborhood's gotten expensive. And the mortgage? Paid off. I made the last payment 14 months ago." Margaret did some quick math on her pad. "So, you own 70% of a house worth roughly $350,000. That's $245,000 in equity. We could potentially take out a line of credit against that equity to fund the legal fees." "But wouldn't I need Elliot's permission for that?" "Not necessarily. As the majority shareholder, you have certain rights. I'd need to look into the specifics, but there are ways to make this work." She studied me carefully. "The real question is, are you willing to fight? Because once we start this, there's no going back. Your relationship with your son will be damaged, possibly permanently." I thought about Elliot's face in the doorway, the way he couldn't meet my eyes, the way he'd let Esme speak for him, make decisions for him, throw away his own mother. "What relationship?" I said quietly. "He already threw me away. At least this way. I'll have a home." Margaret nodded. "Then let's get started. I'll need you to sign some forms, and I'll need copies of all your documentation. I can file the emergency motion as early as this afternoon. How quickly this moves will depend on the court's schedule, but typically we can get a hearing within a week or two." "What happens at the hearing?" "We present your case, the deed showing ownership, evidence that they changed the locks, their text messages to you." The judge will make a determination. Best case scenario, they're ordered to vacate immediately pending resolution of the property dispute. Worst case, they're ordered to give you access but can remain in the house while we work out a longer-term solution. And if they refuse, then we get law enforcement involved. Belinda, I want to be clear with you. This is going to be hard. Your son will be angry. Your daughter-in-law will be furious. Other family members may take sides. You need to be prepared for that. I thought about it. Really thought about it. Did I want to do this? Did I want to wage war against my own son? But then I remembered something. Last Thanksgiving, I'd made Elliot's favorite dinner, turkey with my special herb stuffing, sweet potato casserole, homemade rolls, spent all day in the kitchen. Esme had taken one look at the table and said, "Oh, Belinda, we're actually going to my parents' house for dinner. Didn't Elliot tell you?" He hadn't. I'd stood there in their kitchen, surrounded by food that would go to waste, while they grabbed their coats and left. Esme had called back, "Feel free to eat whatever you want, we'll be back late." I'd eaten Thanksgiving dinner alone that year, cleaned up alone, went to bed alone, and I'd told myself it was fine. It was just a miscommunication. They were young, they had other obligations. But it wasn't fine. Nothing about the last 4 years had been fine. I'd just been too afraid of losing Elliot completely to admit it. Well, I'd already lost him. The Elliot I'd raised, the one who'd hugged me tight and called me the best mom. That boy was gone. Maybe he'd been gone for years and I'd just been too stubborn to see it. "Let's do it," I said. "Whatever it takes." Margaret smiled. "Good, let's get these papers signed, and then I'm going to make some calls. You should find a place to stay for the next week or so. Do you have anywhere you can go?" I thought of my friend Dorothy. We'd been friends for 30 years, worked together at the hospital until we both retired. She'd been telling me for the last 2 years that something wasn't right about my living situation with Elliot and Esme. I'd always defended them. She'd been right all along. "I have a friend. I can ask her." "Do that. And Belinda?" Margaret's voice softened. "I know this feels overwhelming, but you're doing the right thing. No one, and I mean no one, has the right to throw you out of your own home. Not even your son." I left her office 2 hours later with copies of everything I'd signed, a plan of action, and something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The righteous kind. The kind that comes from knowing you're not backing down anymore. I sat in my car and called Dorothy. She answered on the second ring. "Belinda? Honey, are you okay? I've been worried sick. I drove past your house yesterday and saw different cars in the driveway." "Dorothy," I said, "I need to tell you something, and then I need to ask you a favor." I told her everything. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then Dorothy said, "You pack up that motel room right now. You're staying with me. And Belinda, it's about damn time you stood up for yourself." I smiled for the second time in 2 days. "Thanks, Dorothy. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see my guest room. It's mostly storage right now, but we'll make it work." As I drove to the motel to collect my things, my phone buzzed. A text from Elliot. "Mom, we need to talk. This doesn't have to be ugly. Please call me." I stared at the message. He wanted to talk now that he'd had time to think, maybe feel guilty. Or more likely, now that Esme had decided they needed to make sure I really was going away quietly. I didn't respond. I had nothing to say to him. Not yet. Let him wonder. Let him worry. Let him feel even a fraction of the anxiety and fear he'd caused me. My lawyer would do my talking now. Dorothy's guest room smelled like lavender and old books. She'd cleared out most of the storage boxes within an hour of my arrival, insisting I take the good dresser and refusing to hear any arguments about being an imposition. "Belinda Clark, you took care of me when Jim died. Let me return the favor." That had been 6 years ago. Dorothy's husband had passed suddenly from a heart attack, and I'd spent 3 weeks at her house, cooking meals, handling phone calls, just sitting with her when the silence got too loud. She'd never forgotten it. Now here I was, the one needing refuge. It had been 4 days since I'd walked out of Margaret Chen's office. 4 days of waiting, of jumping every time my phone buzzed, of fighting the urge to drive past my own house just to see if anything had changed. Margaret had filed the emergency motion on day 2. We'd gotten a court date, Next Tuesday at 9 in the morning, 8 days away, 8 days of uncertainty. Elliot had called 6 times. I hadn't answered. He'd left 3 voicemails. I'd listened to them once, then deleted them. The first, "Mom, come on. We need to talk about this like adults. You're being childish." The second, "Mom, please. Esme's really upset. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. Just call me back." The third, "Fine. If this is how you want to be, then I guess that's your choice. But don't blame me when you end up alone." That last one had made me laugh. A bitter, hollow sound that made Dorothy look up from her crossword puzzle. What did he say? That I'll end up alone if I don't apologize to them. Dorothy snorted. That boy. I swear I don't know what happened to him. He used to be such a sweet kid. Esme happened to him. Don't give her all the credit. He's a grown man, Belinda. He makes his own choices. She was right. I'd been blaming Esme for everything, but Elliot was 32 years old. Old enough to stand up to his wife if he wanted to. Old enough to protect his mother. He'd chosen not to. That hurt worse than anything Esme had said or done. On day 5, Dorothy came home from her book club with interesting news. You'll never guess who I ran into at the grocery store afterward. Who? Helen Morrison, your old neighbor from Riverside Avenue. My stomach tightened. Helen lived 3 houses down from what used to be my house. A sweet woman in her 70s who'd always been friendly, always waved when she saw me in the yard. What did she say? Dorothy poured herself a glass of iced tea, taking her time. She was enjoying this, and part of me didn't blame her. After years of watching me make excuses for Elliot and Esme, she finally got to be right. She said there's been a lot of activity at your house, trucks coming and going, contractors looks like. Contractors? She said it looks like they're doing renovations. New windows going in, she thinks. Maybe new siding. I felt my jaw clench. They're renovating. With what money? That's what I wondered. But Helen said Esme was outside yesterday supervising, talking about how they're finally making the house their own. Apparently she was quite chatty about it, making it their own. My house. The house I'd worked 13 years to pay off. They were already treating it like it belonged to them completely. Did Helen ask where I was? She did. I told her you were visiting family. Figured that was easier than explaining the whole mess. Thanks. But, Belinda, here's the thing. If they're putting money into renovations, they clearly think they've won. They think you're just going to fade away. I thought about that. About Esme picking out new windows, probably expensive ones. About them making plans, making changes, erasing any trace that I'd ever lived there. They're going to be surprised then, I said quietly. Day 6 brought a text from Esme. The first direct communication I'd had from her since that night. Belinda, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Why don't you come by for coffee? Let's talk this through like family. I showed it to Dorothy. It's a trap, she said immediately. I know. She wants you to come over so she can manipulate you. Get you to sign something, probably. I know that too. So you're not going. I'm not going. I didn't respond to the text. An hour later, another one came through. Belinda, please. Elliot is really torn up about this. You're his mother. He loves you. We both do. Let's fix this. I almost laughed. They loved me so much they'd locked me out and told me to go to a nursing home. That was quite a love. Still, I didn't respond. Day 7, Margaret called. Belinda, I need to prepare you for something. I got a call from opposing counsel. My heart sank. They hired a lawyer? They did. Daniel Reeves. He's expensive. Which means they're taking this seriously. What does that mean for us? It means they're not going to roll over. Reeves is already arguing that you abandoned the property by leaving voluntarily, that you gave verbal permission for them to change the locks, and that you're now trying to stage a hostile takeover of your son's home. That's not true. None of that is true. I know, Belinda, and we have evidence to prove it. The deed, the text messages from Esme about the storage unit. Helen Morrison has agreed to give a statement about what happened. We have a solid case. But I need you to understand, this is going to get nastier before it gets better. How much nastier? Margaret sighed. Reeves is known for going after his opponent's character. He's going to paint you as a bitter, unstable woman who can't accept that her son has moved on. He'll probably bring up every argument you and Esme ever had. Every time you complained about anything. He's going to try to make you look like the villain. I thought about all the times I'd bitten my tongue. All the times I'd swallowed my hurt feelings, my anger, my sense of being treated unfairly. All so I wouldn't rock the boat, wouldn't cause problems. And now they were going to twist that into me being the problem all along. Let him try, I said. The truth is, the truth. Good. That's the attitude we need. Now I need you to do something for me. I need you to write down every financial contribution you've made to that household over the last 4 years. Every grocery bill you paid, every utility payment, every repair you funded, everything. Can you do that? Yes, I kept records. I always kept records. Perfect. Because we're not just fighting to get you back into your house, Belinda. We're going to make sure they understand exactly what they've thrown away. After I hung up, I got out my old checkbook registers and bank statements. I'd always been meticulous about money. You had to be when you grew up poor like I did. Every expense was tracked, every payment noted. I started adding it up. Groceries, roughly $300 a month for 4 years, $14,400. Utilities, I'd paid the electric bill entirely, about $200 a month, $9,600. Property taxes, I'd paid those too because the house was in my name, about $4,000 a year, $16,000 total. Then there were the repairs. The new water heater when the old one died, $1,800. The roof repair after the storm, $3,200. The fence I'd replaced because Esme wanted privacy, $4,500. I kept adding and adding. By the time I was done, I'd contributed over $73,000 to that household in 4 years, not including the original $48,000 I'd given them for the down payment. $121,000. I'd given my son and his wife $121,000 over the course of their marriage, and they'd repaid me by throwing me out like garbage. I stared at that number for a long time. I'd known I'd been contributing, of course, but seeing it all laid out, all added up, it was staggering. Dorothy came home and found me at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers. "What's all this?" "Evidence," I said. Evidence that I wasn't just some freeloader taking up space. I was funding their entire lifestyle. She picked up one of my ledgers, scanning the numbers. Her eyebrows went up. "Lord, Belinda, did you know it was this much?" I knew it was a lot, but I didn't. I didn't really think about it. I just paid for things as they needed paying. They took advantage of you. Yes, they did. Dorothy sat down across from me. "You know what this means, right? Even if the judge doesn't rule in your favor about the house, and I think he will, but even if he doesn't, you're owed this money. This is a debt. I never thought of it that way. I was just helping my son. Well, now you need to start thinking about it legally. You gave them money. Lots of money. That's not a gift when it's given under the assumption you'll have a place to live. That's compensation for housing." I hadn't thought of it like that, but she was right. I'd been paying my way. More than paying my way. "I'll tell Margaret," I said. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Tuesday's hearing, about what I'd say if I had to speak, about what Elliot would say. Would he tell the truth? Would he admit they'd planned this while I was gone, that they'd deliberately waited until I was 3 states away to lock me out? Or would he lie? Would he back up whatever story Esme and their expensive lawyer concocted? I didn't know, and that uncertainty was eating me alive. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and went to Dorothy's living room. I stood at the window, looking out at the dark street, and let myself imagine what would happen if I lost. If the judge said Elliot had as much right to the house as I did, that I couldn't force them out. If I ended up having to sell my house, and split the proceeds with the son who'd betrayed me. I'd have money, sure. Maybe $175,000 after the sale, after lawyer fees. Enough to start over, find an apartment, maybe even a small condo. But I'd be alone. Really alone. My sister Linda was dying. My son had chosen his wife over me. I had friends like Dorothy, sure. But at 65, starting completely over, with no family to speak of. I cut off that train of thought. I couldn't think that way. Not now. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Dorothy appeared in her bathrobe. Can't sleep either? No. She came and stood beside me at the window. For a while, we just stood there in companionable silence. You're going to win, Dorothy said finally. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because you have something they don't. What's that? The truth, and a paper trail to prove it. She turned to look at me. Belinda, I've known you for 30 years. You're the most honest person I've ever met. Sometimes annoyingly honest. You don't lie, you don't cheat, you don't manipulate. You just do what's right, even when it costs you. Maybe that was my mistake. No, that's your strength. And on Tuesday, when you're standing in front of that judge, that's what he's going to see. An honest woman who got taken advantage of by people she trusted. I wanted to believe her. I really did. What if Elliot hates me after this? Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she said gently, Honey, I think he already does. Or at least, he doesn't love you the way a son should love his mother. And I know that hurts. I know it does. But you can't set yourself on fire to keep him warm. Not anymore. She was right. Deep down, I knew she was right. Come on, Dorothy said, taking my arm. Let's make some chamomile tea, and then we're both going to bed. You need rest before Tuesday. As I followed her to the kitchen, my phone buzzed one more time. Another text from Elliot. Mom, please talk to me before Tuesday. We can work this out. Don't make this worse than it has to be. Don't make this worse. As if I was the one who'd made it bad in the first place. I turned off my phone and went to help Dorothy with the tea. Tuesday was coming, and this time I wasn't backing down. Tuesday morning arrived cold and gray. I'd been awake since 4:30, too nervous to sleep. Dorothy made me eat breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast that tasted like cardboard in my dry mouth, and then drove me to the courthouse. Margaret was waiting outside courtroom 3B, looking crisp and professional in a navy suit. She smiled when she saw me, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ready? No, but let's do it anyway. She touched my arm briefly. Remember what we talked about. Stay calm. Don't let them provoke you. Answer questions directly and honestly. The truth is on our side. We walked into the courtroom together. It was smaller than I'd expected from watching TV shows. Just a few rows of benches, the judge's platform, and 2 tables facing forward. Elliot and Esme were already there, sitting at the other table with their lawyer. My son wore a suit I'd never seen before. Probably new, probably expensive. Esme was in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Elliot looked up when I walked in. Our eyes met for just a second before he looked away. Not guilty, not ashamed, just away. Esme, on the other hand, stared right at me. If looks could kill, I'd have dropped dead in the aisle. Their lawyer, Daniel Reeves, was exactly what I'd expected. Mid-50s, silver hair, expensive watch, the kind of confidence that comes from winning more cases than you lose. He glanced at me once, a quick assessing look, then leaned over to whisper something to Esme. She nodded. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Brennan. We stood. The judge entered, a woman in her early 60s with gray hair pulled back in a bun and sharp, intelligent eyes. She settled into her seat and looked at both tables. Please be seated. This is case number 74321, Clark v. Clark, petition for emergency injunctive relief and determination of property rights. Counsel, are we ready to proceed? Margaret stood. Yes, Your Honor. Reeves stood. Yes, Your Honor. Very well. Ms. Chen, this is your motion. Please present your opening statement. Margaret rose, collected her thoughts, and began. Your Honor, this case is straightforward. My client, Belinda Clark, is the primary owner of the property located at 412 Riverside Avenue, holding a 70% interest. While she was out of state caring for her terminally ill sister, the defendants, her son and daughter-in-law, changed the locks on the home, refused her entry, and informed her that she was no longer welcome to live there. They did this without legal authority and without her consent. We're asking the court to restore my client's access to her own home and to order the defendants to vacate the premises until this property dispute can be properly resolved. Judge Brennan nodded, making notes. Mr. Reeves? Reeves stood slowly, like he had all the time in the world. Your Honor, this is not a case of illegal eviction. This is a case of a family dispute being weaponized by a woman who cannot accept that her son has moved on with his life. Mrs. Clark voluntarily left the property. She had been living there as a guest of her son and daughter-in-law, who are also part owners of the home. When she left for an extended trip, my clients took the opportunity to establish some necessary boundaries. Mrs. Clark's reaction, filing this motion, is nothing more than an attempt to maintain control over her adult son's life and home. I felt my hands clench in my lap. Dorothy, sitting behind me in the gallery, made a small sound of disgust. Judge Brennan held up a hand. Ms. Chen, I'll hear from your client first. Mrs. Clark, please take the stand. My legs felt shaky as I walked to the witness stand. The bailiff had me swear to tell the truth. I sat down, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Margaret approached with a warm, encouraging expression. Mrs. Clark, can you tell the court about the property at 412 Riverside Avenue? When did you acquire it? I took a breath. I bought it in March of 2009. I'd just gotten divorced, and the settlement gave me enough for a down payment. I paid $187,000 for it. Took out a mortgage for $145,000. And did you pay that mortgage yourself? Yes, every month for 13 years. I paid it off completely in February of 2022. Can you tell the court about adding your son Elliot to the deed? That was 2 years ago when he got engaged. He asked me to add him to the deed so that if something happened to me, he wouldn't have to deal with probate. I loved my son. I trusted him. So I added him. But I never removed my own name. I never transferred the house entirely to him. Margaret nodded. Now, can you tell the court about your living arrangements after your son married? I explained it all. How I'd sold my mother's house to help with their down payment. How Esme had suggested I live with them. How it had seemed temporary at first but had become permanent. Did you contribute financially to the household? Yes, substantially. Margaret handed me a document. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit A, a detailed accounting of Mrs. Clark's financial contributions to the household over the past 4 years. Judge Brennan took the document, scanning it. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Mrs. Clark, Margaret continued, can you summarize these contributions for the court? Over 4 years, I paid approximately $14,400 for groceries, $9,600 for utilities, $16,000 in property taxes. I also paid for major repairs, a new water heater, roof repairs, fence replacement. In total, I contributed approximately $73,000 to the household expenses, not including the original $48,000 down payment I gave them. I heard Esme whisper something to Reeves. He shook his head slightly, telling her to be quiet. Thank you, Mrs. Clark. Now, can you tell the court what happened when you returned from visiting your sister? I told the story again, every detail, the key that wouldn't work. Esme's cruel smile, her words, Mudamos você de endereço, vá pro asilo, the way Elliot had just stood there, nodding. Did they give you any warning this was going to happen? No, nothing. I'd been gone for 3 weeks taking care of my sister who has terminal cancer. I had no idea they were planning this. What did you do? I left. I took 1 box and I left. I stayed in a motel that night because I had nowhere else to go. Margaret paused, letting that sink in. Mrs. Clark, you're 65 years old. You'd just spent 3 weeks caring for your dying sister. And your son locked you out of your own home with no warning, no place to go, and told you to find a nursing home. Is that correct? Yes. I saw Judge Brennan's expression harden slightly. Good. Thank you, Mrs. Clark. No further questions at this time. Reeves stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He approached me with a pleasant smile that didn't match the coldness in his eyes. Mrs. Clark, you testified that you lived there as their guest initially, correct? I lived in my own house, where my son and his wife also lived. But you just said Esme suggested you live with them. That implies it was their decision to allow you to stay, doesn't it? It was a mutual agreement. I owned the house. Ah, but you added your son to the deed. So you acknowledged he had ownership rights, correct? Yes, but yes or no, please. Margaret stood. Your Honor, counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Mr. Reeves, let her finish her answers. Reeves smiled apologetically. Of course, Your Honor. Mrs. Clark, you were gone for 3 weeks. Did you tell your son and daughter-in-law when you'd be returning? I told them I'd be gone for a while. My sister's condition was unpredictable. So you didn't give them a specific return date? No, but... And isn't it true that you and your daughter-in-law had a contentious relationship? I hesitated. We had our differences. Differences. Can you elaborate? Esme and I didn't always see eye to eye on household matters. Household matters. Like the fact that you tried to control how they lived in their own home? I never. That's not true. Isn't it true that you frequently criticized my client's housekeeping? I offered to help clean. That's all. Offered to help? Or insisted on doing things your way? He didn't wait for me to answer. Mrs. Clark, isn't it true that you refused to respect their privacy? That you would enter their bedroom without knocking? I knocked. I always knocked. According to my clients, you did not. They felt constantly invaded, constantly judged. Isn't that why they needed space from you? No. I tried so hard to stay out of their way. I spent most of my time in my room. Your room? Or their guest room that you'd been occupying for 4 years. Margaret stood again. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained. But the damage was done. Reeves had planted the seed that I was overbearing, invasive, impossible to live with. He continued for another 20 minutes, twisting everything I said, making me sound like a controlling mother who couldn't let go. By the time he finished, I felt exhausted and defeated. Redirect, Ms. Chen? Judge Brennan asked. Margaret stood. Just briefly, Your Honor. Mrs. Clark, whose name is on the property deed as primary owner? Mine. And who paid the mortgage for 13 years? I did. Who paid the property taxes for the past 4 years? I did. And when you were locked out of your own home, did anyone, your son, your daughter-in-law, offer to help you find a place to stay? Offer to pay for a hotel? Anything? No. Esme texted me the address of a storage unit where they'd put my belongings. I had 30 days before they'd stop paying for it. Thank you. No further questions. I stepped down, my legs shaking. As I passed Elliot's table, I looked at him one more time. He was staring at his hands, his jaw clenched. Judge Brennan called for a brief recess. Margaret, Dorothy, and I sat in the hallway while Reeves consulted with his clients. You did great, Margaret said. It didn't feel great. He made me sound like a horrible person. That's his job, but the facts are the facts, Belinda. You own 70% of that house. You paid for everything. They locked you out. The judge saw that. When we returned, Judge Brennan had clearly made her decision. She didn't waste time. I've reviewed the deed, the financial records, and heard testimony from both parties. The facts are clear. Mrs. Belinda Clark is the primary owner of the property in question. While her son, Elliot Clark, does hold a 30% interest, he and his wife had no legal authority to change the locks and exclude Mrs. Clark from her own property. I held my breath. Furthermore, the court finds that Mrs. Clark's contributions to the household, over $70,000 in 4 years, demonstrate that she was not merely a guest, but a co-resident with significant financial investment in the property. The defendant's actions in locking her out without notice while she was caring for a terminally ill family member were not only legally improper, but unconscionable. Esme grabbed Elliot's arm, whispering urgently. He just sat there, frozen. Therefore, the court orders the following. The defendants must immediately provide Mrs. Clark with keys to the property and restore her full access. Additionally, the defendants are ordered to vacate the premises within 30 days while the parties work out a long-term resolution to the property ownership. If they cannot reach an agreement, the court will order a partition and sale of the property. This order is effective immediately. The gavel came down. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process it. Margaret was smiling, squeezing my hand. Dorothy was crying behind me. I'd won. I'd actually won. Across the aisle, Esme was standing, her face red with fury. "This is insane! You can't just throw us out of our home!" "Ms. Esme," Judge Brennan said coldly, "this is not your home. It is Mrs. Clark's home, which she generously allowed you to live in. You repaid that generosity with cruelty. You have 30 days. Use them wisely." Reeves was trying to calm Esme down, but she was beyond reason. She turned to Elliot. "Say something. Don't just sit there." But Elliot didn't say anything. He just looked at me one last time, and I saw it finally. Guilt. Shame. The recognition of what he'd done. Too little. Too late. I stood up, gathered my things, and walked out of that courtroom with my head held high. Outside, in the bright sunshine, Dorothy hugged me tight. "You did it. You actually did it." "I did it," I repeated, still not quite believing it. Margaret shook my hand. "Congratulations, Belinda. You have 30 days before they have to leave. I suggest you use that time to decide what you want to do long-term. Sell the house and split the proceeds? Buy out Elliot's share? Whatever you decide, we'll make it happen." I nodded, too overwhelmed to think about that right now. As we walked to the parking lot, I saw Elliot standing by his truck. Alone. Esme must have stormed off ahead of him. He saw me coming and straightened up. For a moment, I thought about walking past him without a word, but I couldn't. Not yet. I walked over to him and we stood there facing each other. Dorothy and Margaret hung back, giving us space. "Mom," Elliot started, his voice hoarse. Don't," I said quietly. "Don't apologize. Not now. Not after everything. I didn't think it would go this far." Esme said, "Esme, it always comes back to Esme, doesn't it?" I shook my head. "Elliot, you're 32 years old. You made your own choices. You stood there and watched her tell me to go to a nursing home. You packed up my things while I was taking care of your aunt. You locked me out of my own house. Those were your choices. I know, and I'm—" "You have 30 days to find a new place," I continued, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "I suggest you start looking." I turned to walk away, but his voice stopped me. "Did you ever love me?" I turned back, stunned. "What? Did you ever actually love me? Or was I just some project to you? Some way to prove you were a good mother?" The question was so absurd, so cruel that I actually laughed. "I gave you everything, Elliot. Everything I had. Every dollar, every hour, every dream I had for myself. I gave it all to you. I worked myself to exhaustion to give you opportunities I never had. And you ask me if I loved you?" His face crumpled. "Then why does this feel like you're throwing me away?" "Because," I said softly, "that's what it feels like when someone stands up for themselves after you've been throwing them away for years. You just never noticed because I made it easy for you. Well, I'm done being easy. I'm done being disposable." I walked away then, and this time I didn't look back. Dorothy drove me back to her house, both of us quiet, processing everything that had happened. "You know what you're going to do?" she asked as we pulled into her driveway. "Yeah," I said. "I'm going home." 4 months later, I stood in my living room, watching the afternoon sun stream through the windows I'd had cleaned last week. The house looked different now, felt different. The expensive modern art Esme had hung was gone, replaced by photographs of people who actually mattered to me. Dorothy and me at the Grand Canyon last month. Linda, in a photo from before she got sick, laughing at something I'd said. My mother, young and beautiful, holding baby me. No pictures of Elliot. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I hadn't decided. The first week after the court order had been tense. Elliot and Esme had avoided me entirely, coming and going at odd hours, treating me like I was invisible when we crossed paths. Fine by me. I'd spent those days quietly documenting everything, taking photos of the expensive renovations they'd made without my permission, cataloging which of my belongings had been damaged or thrown away. Margaret had advised me to keep records of everything, just in case they try to claim they improved the property and want compensation. They didn't. On day 28, Elliot had knocked on my bedroom door. I'd moved back into what used to be my room. They'd already painted it pale yellow for the nursery, but I didn't care. I'd put my old furniture back and tried not to think about the plans they'd had for this space. "Mom?" His voice had been quiet through the door. "Can we talk?" I'd opened it. He stood there with an envelope in his hands, looking exhausted. Older somehow. "We're leaving tomorrow," he'd said. I just wanted to. I wanted to say goodbye. Okay. He'd stood there awkwardly, like he was waiting for something. For me to make it easier, probably. To tell him it was okay, that I forgave him, that we could put this behind us. I didn't say any of those things. "This is for you," he'd finally said, holding out the envelope. "It's my share of the property. I'm signing it over to you. No lawyers, no fight. It's yours. All of it." I'd taken the envelope, surprised. Inside were legal documents transferring his 30% ownership to me, signed and notarized. Why? He'd shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Because Esme was right about one thing. I don't deserve it. And I can't—" His voice had cracked slightly. "I can't keep taking from you. I've taken enough." "Elliot, I'm sorry." He'd said it fast, like he'd been holding it in for weeks. "I'm sorry for all of it. For letting Esme convince me you were the problem. For not standing up for you. For forgetting everything you did for me. For—" He'd stopped, his eyes finally meeting mine, and they were red. "For being such a terrible son." I'd stood there holding those papers, looking at this man who used to be my little boy, and I'd felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. Just a hollow sadness for what we'd lost. "Where are you going?" "Esme's parents have a rental property. We're staying there for now, just until we figure things out." "Is she—" I gestured vaguely. "Pregnant? No, that was—" He'd laughed bitterly. "That was a lie. She thought it would make me more committed to the house, to making it ours. Another manipulation. I shouldn't have been surprised." "I hope you find what you're looking for," I'd said finally. "I really do." He'd nodded, started to leave, then turned back. Do you think someday we could—" "I don't know, Elliot. I honestly don't know." That had been 4 months ago. I hadn't heard from him since. No calls, no texts, no attempts to see if I was okay. Part of me was relieved. Part of me, a small, stubborn part, still hoped he might try harder to fix what he'd broken. But I'd stopped waiting for things that might never come. Instead, I'd focused on rebuilding. Not just the house, but myself. The house was fully mine now. 100%. Margaret had handled all the paperwork. I'd had the locks changed again. Different ones this time, ones only I had keys to. I'd repainted Elliot's old room, turning it into a library. All those books I'd collected over the years but never had space to display were finally on shelves, organized and beautiful. I'd ripped out Esme's expensive kitchen backsplash, the one she'd installed without asking me, and replaced it with simple white subway tiles. My choice, my style. The rose bushes I'd planted years ago were thriving. I'd added a small vegetable garden in the back, tomatoes, peppers, herbs, things that needed tending, that rewarded care with growth. I'd joined a book club at the library, made friends with 2 women around my age, Patricia and Sarah, who invited me to dinner parties and didn't ask probing questions about why I lived alone. They just accepted me as I was. Dorothy came over twice a week for dinner. We'd cook together, drink wine, talk about everything and nothing. She'd become more than a friend. She'd become family, the kind you choose. Linda had passed away 6 weeks ago. I'd been there, holding her hand, when she took her last breath. It had been peaceful, sad, but peaceful. At the funeral, I'd run into some distant cousins I hadn't seen in years. They'd asked about Elliot. "We're not in touch right now," I'd said simply. No explanation, no details. Let them think what they wanted. One of them had hugged me and whispered, "Good for you. Family's not always blood." She was right about that. I'd started taking a watercolor class at the community center. Turned out I was terrible at it, but I didn't care. The instructor, a kind woman named Marion, said I had an interesting perspective. "You paint like someone who's seeing the world fresh," she'd said. "Like you're noticing things for the first time." Maybe I was. Maybe losing everything had taught me to appreciate the small things. The way sunlight hit my kitchen counter in the morning, the sound of rain on the roof, the satisfaction of cooking a meal just for myself, exactly the way I liked it. I'd also started volunteering at a women's shelter downtown, just a few hours a week, helping in the kitchen, sorting donations. Some of the women there had stories that made mine look like nothing: abusive partners, children taken away, addiction, homelessness. One woman, Teresa, reminded me a little of myself. 58 years old, kicked out by her daughter and son-in-law after they'd slowly taken over her house. She didn't have a deed to prove ownership like I did. She'd lost everything. I'd given her Margaret's card, told her there might be options, might be ways to fight back. "I don't have money for a lawyer," she'd said sadly. "Margaret takes some cases pro bono. Call her. Tell her Belinda sent you. The worst she can say is no." Teresa had called. Margaret had taken the case. I'd followed up last week. Teresa had won temporary housing and was working on a settlement with her daughter. Helping her had felt good. Better than I'd expected. Like maybe my own painful experience could serve some purpose beyond just teaching me a lesson. I was thinking about becoming a volunteer advocate. There were programs that trained people to help others navigate legal issues, especially seniors being taken advantage of by family members. I'd be good at it. I understood the shame, the guilt, the feeling that you somehow deserved it. This afternoon, I was meeting Patricia and Sarah for coffee. After that, I had my watercolor class. Tonight, Dorothy was coming over and we were going to attempt making Thai food from a cookbook she'd bought. My life was full. Different than I'd imagined it would be at 65, but full nonetheless. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a brief moment, my heart jumped. Maybe it was Elliot. Maybe he'd decided to try to fix things. I opened the door. It wasn't Elliot. It was a young woman, maybe mid-20s, with a friendly smile. "Mrs. Clark?" "Yes?" "Hi, I'm Amanda from Riverside Realty. I know this is unexpected, but I wanted to drop off some information about a client of mine who's very interested in properties in this neighborhood. If you're ever considering selling, we'd love to discuss—" "I'm not selling," I said firmly. "This is my home. Of course, I completely understand. But if you ever change your mind, here's my card. The market is really strong right now, and a house like this—" "I'm not changing my mind," I said, not unkindly. "But thank you." She nodded, smiled, and left. I closed the door and looked around my living room again. This house had almost been my prison, the place where I'd made myself small, where I'd learned to take up less space, to need less, to be less, where I'd been locked out and thrown away. But I'd fought for it, and now it was something else entirely. It was proof. Proof that I was strong enough to stand up for myself. Proof that I didn't need to accept crumbs of affection from people who should have loved me freely. Proof that I was enough. Just me. All by myself. My phone buzzed. A text from Dorothy. "Running late. Start without me if you need to. And please tell me you're not attempting spring rolls alone. Last time was a disaster." I smiled and texted back. "Wouldn't dream of it. See you at 6. I had 2 hours before Dorothy arrived. I made myself a cup of tea, grabbed the novel I'd been reading, and settled into my favorite chair, the one by the window that got the best afternoon light. As I opened the book, I heard a car pull up outside. I glanced out the window. It was Elliot's truck. My heart did something complicated. I watched as he got out, stood there for a moment looking at the house, then walked up to the door. The doorbell rang. I sat there, book in my lap, tea getting cold on the side table. I could ignore it, pretend I wasn't home, but I'd spent too much of my life hiding, avoiding conflict, making myself invisible. I set down the book and opened the door. Elliot stood there, and he looked different. Thinner, tired, older. "Hi, Mom." "Elliot, I know I don't have any right to be here. I know you probably don't want to see me, but He stopped, gathering his courage. I've been going to therapy, individual therapy, and the therapist asked me to write down everything I took from you, everything you gave me. And Mom, his voice broke. It's so much. It's everything. And I don't know how to even begin to. Elliot, I said gently, why are you here? Because I want to try. I want to fix this. Not right away. I know it'll take time. Maybe years. Maybe it'll never be the same. But I want to try. If you'll let me. I looked at my son, really looked at him, saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the understanding finally of what he'd done. Was it enough? Could I trust him again? I didn't know. Honestly, I didn't know. But maybe, just maybe we could find out. I'm having dinner with Dorothy tonight, I said. But tomorrow is Saturday. If you want to come by around 10, we could have coffee and talk. Hope flickered across his face. Really? Just coffee, just talking. No promises beyond that. I'll take it. I'll take whatever you're willing to give. I nodded. Then I'll see you tomorrow. He smiled, tentative, uncertain, but genuine. Thank you, Mom, for giving me a chance. After he left, I closed the door and leaned against it. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe we'd rebuild something. Maybe we wouldn't. Maybe Elliot would prove he'd really changed. Maybe he'd disappoint me again. But whatever happened, I knew one thing for certain. I was going to be okay. I had my house, my home, the one I'd fought for, the one I'd won. I had friends who loved me, a life that was mine, and for the first time in years, maybe in my entire life, I didn't need anyone else to make me feel complete. I was already whole. I picked up my tea, returned to my chair, and opened my book again. Outside, the sun was setting, painting my living room in shades of gold and amber. It was beautiful. My life was beautiful, and it was just beginning. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.